The winter of 2005 hit Portland harder than usual. Snow piled up on street corners and the wind cut through even the thickest jackets. For Rob Donovan, the cold seemed to seep deeper than just his bones. 3 months ago, he had lost his wife Linda to cancer, leaving him alone to raise their teenage daughter Lily. The warmth had gone out of their small apartment, and not just because they were cutting back on heating to save money. Rob pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he trudged home from his construction job. His fingers were still stiff from working outside all day, and his back ached from lifting heavy materials. But he kept going, one foot in front of the other. Lily would be waiting at home, probably with her homework spread across the kitchen table. At 14, she was doing her best to be strong, but Rob saw the sadness in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. The shortcut through the alley behind Greenway Street would save him 10 minutes of walking in the bitter cold. Rob ducked into the narrow passage, careful to avoid the patches of ice that glimmered under the dim streetlights. He was halfway through when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the usual city noises. A cough, small and stifled as if someone was trying hard not to be heard. Rob stopped. The sound came again, followed by a whispered shh, behind a dumpster, tucked into a cardboard shelter that was pathetically inadequate against the freezing temperatures. Rob found them. 2 kids, a girl who looked about 12 and a younger boy who couldn't have been more than 9. Their faces were smudged with dirt and they wore layers of mismatched clothes that had seen better days. The boy's shoes were held together with duct tape. "Hey there," Rob said softly, crouching down to their level. "Are you two okay?" The girl pushed the boy behind her, her eyes wary and defensive. "We're fine. Just resting." Rob recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn for weeks after Linda's diagnosis. The look of someone trying to be brave while terrified inside. "It's freezing out here," he said. "Where are your folks?" The girl's chin jutted out. "Don't have any." The boy peeked out from behind his sister. "Mom went to sleep and didn't wake up," he said before the girl shushed him. Rob felt something twist in his chest. He thought about walking away. He had his own problems, his own grief, his own child to worry about. But as the wind howled through the alley, sending a spray of snow over the children's makeshift shelter, he knew he couldn't leave them there. "I live 5 blocks from here," he said. "Just me and my daughter. We don't have much, but we've got heat and some leftover spaghetti. You could warm up at least." The girl narrowed her eyes. "We don't go with strangers." Smart kid, Rob thought. "Name's Rob Donovan. I work construction over at Bridgeport Development." "What's your name?" A long pause. "Maggie," the girl finally said. "This is Tommy." "Nice to meet you, Maggie and Tommy. Now we're not strangers anymore." Tommy's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. Maggie bit her lip. "Just for tonight," Rob said. "1 meal, get warm, and if you want to leave after that, I won't stop you." 5 blocks felt much longer with 2 extra people trudging alongside him. Neither child had a proper winter coat. Tommy kept stumbling in his broken shoes, and Rob ended up carrying him piggyback for the last 2 blocks. The boy weighed almost nothing, which worried Rob even more. When he unlocked the door to apartment 3B, Lily looked up from her math homework, her expression changing from welcome to confusion. "Dad? Who are they?" she asked, eyeing the 2 ragged children standing awkwardly in their doorway. Rob set Tommy down gently. "This is Maggie and Tommy. They're going to join us for dinner and warm up a bit." He gave Lily a look that said, "I'll explain later." Lily didn't look happy, but she nodded and started clearing her school books from the table. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, and 1 bathroom. But it was clean and warm. Rob noticed how Maggie's eyes darted around, taking in every detail, evaluating escape routes. Tommy, meanwhile, stared openly at their tiny Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with a mix of store-bought and handmade ornaments. "Why don't you 2 wash up while I heat dinner?" Rob suggested, pointing to the bathroom. Maggie hesitated, then nodded, taking Tommy's hand and leading him away. Lily cornered him immediately. "Dad, what are you doing? We barely have enough for us." "They were sleeping in an alley, Lil," Rob said quietly, taking the container of leftover spaghetti from the fridge. "That's one night. But if Mom were here, what would she do?" Lily fell silent. They both knew the answer. Linda Donovan had been the kind of woman who took in stray cats and always made extra food for neighbors going through hard times. Even during her illness, she'd worried more about others than herself. When Maggie and Tommy returned, their faces were cleaner but still thin and hollow-cheeked. Rob set out 4 plates of spaghetti, stretching the leftovers with extra sauce. Tommy dug in immediately, but Maggie watched Rob take a bite first before allowing herself to eat. "How long have you been on your own?" Rob asked gently after they'd eaten in silence for a few minutes. Maggie pushed her spaghetti around the plate. 3 months, maybe. "Since Mom died," Tommy added. "The people came to take us, but Maggie said we had to run." Rob exchanged a glance with Lily. Social services. Foster care. The system that was supposed to help kids like these, but that clearly had failed them somehow. "We were doing okay," Maggie said defensively, "until it got so cold." Rob didn't press further during dinner. Instead, he talked about neutral things. His work on the new apartment complex downtown, Lily's science project, the record snowfall this winter. Slowly, Tommy began to chime in, asking questions about Rob's construction work with growing interest. Even Maggie relaxed a fraction, though her eyes remained watchful. After dinner, Rob made up the couch with spare blankets and pillows. "You two can sleep here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we can figure things out." When the kids were settled, Rob found Lily in her bedroom, sitting on her bed with her arms crossed. "I know what you're thinking, Dad," she said. "But we can't keep them. We're barely making it ourselves." Rob sighed and sat beside his daughter. "I'm not planning to keep them, Lil, but I couldn't leave them out there to freeze. So what happens tomorrow?" It was a good question. The responsible thing would be to call social services in the morning, but the way Maggie had reacted at the mere mention of the people who had tried to take them made Rob hesitate. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out." That night, Rob lay awake long after Lily had fallen asleep. From the living room, he could hear Tommy's soft snores and the occasional rustle as Maggie shifted on the couch. He thought about Linda, about the promises they'd made to each other, about the kind of man he wanted to be, even when life had knocked him down. He thought about his own father, who had walked out when Rob was 10, and how that abandonment had shaped his entire life. He thought about Tommy's taped-up shoes and Maggie's protective stance, about how thin they both were, and how Tommy's eyes had lit up at the sight of their modest Christmas tree. It was just one night, Rob told himself. Just one meal, one warm place to sleep. That's all he'd promised. But deep down, as the snow continued to fall outside his window, covering the city in a blanket of white, Rob knew that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. And despite the rational voice in his head telling him he had enough problems of his own, another voice, one that sounded suspiciously like Linda's, whispered that sometimes the biggest blessings come disguised as problems. Rob finally drifted off to sleep as the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, with no plan beyond making pancakes for breakfast. One day at a time, he thought. That's how they'd get through this, one day at a time. That one night turned into 3, then a week, then a month. Each morning, Rob would wake up thinking, today I'll figure out what to do about Maggie and Tommy. And each evening would find all 4 of them around the small kitchen table, sharing a meal that Rob stretched further than he thought possible. Lily had been right. They barely had enough for themselves. Rob started picking up extra shifts on weekends, coming home with sawdust in his hair and exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. But he also came home with grocery bags and once, a pair of new shoes for Tommy that made the boy's eyes widen like he'd been handed the moon. You didn't have to, Maggie said, watching her brother parade around the apartment in his new sneakers. Rob shrugged. Kid needs shoes that aren't falling apart. What he didn't say was how his heart had clenched when he saw Tommy playing in the snow outside their building. His feet wrapped in plastic bags inside those duct-taped disasters. Some things you just did because they needed doing. The first real challenge came when Tommy got sick. Just a cold, but it hit the undernourished boy hard. Rob found himself sitting up all night with a feverish child who wasn't legally his, wondering if he should take him to a hospital where they'd ask questions he couldn't answer. My mom used to make hot lemon water with honey when we got sick, Maggie offered, hovering anxiously by her brother's side. So Rob made hot lemon water with honey, and Lily contributed her stuffed bear for Tommy to cuddle. And together they weathered the fever that broke. Just before dawn, it was Lily who first broached the subject that had been hanging over them. They need to go to school, she said one evening after the younger kids were asleep. Tommy told me he's never even been to 3rd grade. Rob ran a hand over his face. I know, but the minute I try to enroll them, there'll be questions. They'll want to know who they are, who I am to them. So what are you to them, Dad? It was a fair question. Rob wasn't their father, wasn't even related to them. He was just a man who couldn't walk past two freezing kids in an alley. But now, weeks later, he found himself buying clothes that fit them, making sure they brushed their teeth, breaking up squabbles over who got the last apple, acting, for all intents and purposes, like their dad. The decision came after he overheard Maggie talking to Tommy late one night. "We can't stay here forever," she whispered. "Rob's nice, but he's not our family." "Why not?" Tommy asked. "He makes pancakes on Sundays like Dad used to, and he doesn't drink the sleepy juice that made Mom go away." "That's not how it works," Maggie said, but she sounded less certain. The next day, Rob called in sick to work for the first time in years and went to the local social services office. 6 hours, countless forms, and many pointed questions later, he emerged as the temporary guardian of Maggie and Tommy Chen, siblings who had indeed fallen through the cracks after their mother's fatal overdose 3 months earlier. "This is just temporary," the social worker, Ms. Patel, emphasized, "until we can locate any relatives or find a permanent placement." Rob nodded, but as he looked at the official papers in his hands, he felt something shift inside him. These weren't just two kids he'd found in an alley anymore. They were his responsibility now, legally, officially, completely. The first thing he did was enroll them in school. Tommy went into 3rd grade, while Maggie, who turned out to be 13 rather than 12, started 7th grade at the same middle school as Lily. "They're going to hate me," Lily moaned the night before their first day. "Everyone's going to ask who they are, and I don't even know what to say." "Tell them the truth," Rob said. "They're staying with us for a while because they need a place to stay. That's all anyone needs to know." It wasn't that simple, of course. The transition was rocky. Tommy struggled with classwork after missing months of school, and Maggie got into a fight the second week when someone made a comment about her secondhand clothes. Rob had to take time off work again to meet with principals and teachers, trying to explain a situation he barely understood himself. At home, things were equally challenging. Their apartment felt impossibly small with 4 people. Lily resented sharing her room with Maggie, who still kept all her possessions in a backpack by the door ready to run. Tommy had nightmares that woke the whole household, and their budget, already tight, was stretched to breaking point. Yet somehow they managed. Rob worked longer hours. Lily, after some initial resistance, started helping Tommy with his homework. Maggie, wary of accepting too much, found ways to contribute, doing laundry, helping with dinner, even fixing the wobbly kitchen table with a determination that reminded Rob of himself at that age. The first breakthrough came about 2 months in. Rob came home to find Maggie and Lily laughing together in the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes as they attempted to make cookies from scratch. "We had this assignment in home ec," Lily explained, looking slightly embarrassed by her obvious enjoyment. "Maggie said she knew how to make cookies, so my mom taught me," Maggie said, a shadow crossing her face. "Before, you know," Rob nodded. "She'd be proud you remembered." The cookies were misshapen and slightly burned, but they ate them all anyway, declaring them the best dessert ever. That night, for the first time, Maggie didn't check that her backpack was still by the door before going to bed. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing with it a call from Ms. Patel. "We've located a potential foster placement for the Chen children," she said. "A couple in Seattle with experience fostering siblings." Rob's grip tightened on the phone. "Seattle? That's 3 hours away." "It's a good placement," Ms. Patel said gently. "A stable home, experienced foster parents." "They have a stable home here," Rob found himself saying. "They're doing well in school, they've made friends, they're settled. Mr. Donovan, the temporary guardianship was always meant to be." "Well, temporary. You've done a wonderful thing giving these children a safe place to land, but what if it wasn't temporary?" The words came out before Rob had fully formed the thought. "What if I applied to be their foster parent? Permanently?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's a significant commitment, Mr. Donovan. You're a single parent already, working full-time." "I know what I am," Rob said, more sharply than he intended. "I also know that those kids have been through enough upheaval. They're just starting to feel safe here. Moving them again would be cruel." That evening, after the younger kids were in bed, Rob sat down with Lily. "I need to ask you something important," he said, "and I want an honest answer." Lily looked up from her textbook, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it? How would you feel if Maggie and Tommy stayed with us? Not just for now, but for good?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She picked at a loose thread on her sweater, her brow furrowed in thought. "It's hard sometimes," she finally said, "sharing everything. And Maggie can be really annoying." Rob nodded, his heart sinking a little. "But," Lily continued, "it's also kind of nice not to be alone all the time. And Tommy really looks up to you, Dad. He told me he wants to build things like you do when he grows up." She looked up, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. Mom would have wanted them to stay. She always said our family had enough love to share. The next few months were a whirlwind of paperwork, home visits, background checks, and parenting classes. Rob's boss, understanding but practical, agreed to adjust his schedule so he could be home when the kids got out of school. Their landlord, after some negotiation, allowed them to move to a larger 3-bedroom unit in the same building, even though it stretched their budget to the breaking point. By summer, Rob had official foster parent certification, and the Chen siblings had their own beds in rooms that were truly theirs, Tommy sharing with Rob, Maggie with Lily. That summer also brought the first real test of their makeshift family. Tommy, growing more confident each day, fell while climbing a tree in the park and broke his arm. At the hospital, the nurse asked, "Are you his father?" Rob hesitated only a second before saying, "Yes," later, as they drove home with Tommy proudly showing off his cast. Maggie said quietly, "You're not really our dad." "You know." Rob kept his eyes on the road. "I know that, so why did you tell that nurse you were?" "Because it was simpler. And because—" Rob searched for the right words. "Because being a dad isn't just about who helped make you. It's about who's there when you break your arm or have a nightmare or need help with your math homework." Maggie was silent for so long that Rob thought the conversation was over. Then she said, "Our real dad left when Tommy was a baby. He never did any of those things." Rob reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said with a wisdom beyond her years. "If he hadn't left, we wouldn't be here now. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were arguments and tears, misunderstandings, and slammed doors. Lily and Maggie fought like sisters, which meant both fierce rivalries and fierce loyalties. Tommy, as he grew more secure, tested boundaries in ways that drove Rob to the end of his patience. Money was always tight, and Rob's construction job didn't leave much room for advancement. But the talent for acting that surprised them all. Family movie nights with popcorn and blanket forts that grew more elaborate each time. 10 years can change everything or nothing at all. In the decade that followed Rob's fateful decision to bring 2 homeless children into his life, the makeshift family weathered storms both literal and figurative. They moved twice. First to a slightly larger apartment when the kids hit their teenage growth spurts. Then to a modest fixer-upper on the outskirts of Portland when Rob finally saved enough for a down payment. That house became their canvas. Rob taught Tommy how to replace rotting floorboards and install new kitchen cabinets. Weekends found them all wielding paintbrushes or arguing good-naturedly about wall colors. Even Maggie, who initially claimed total disinterest in construction stuff, proved to have a keen eye for design and an unexpected talent for detailed tile work. "You're a natural," Rob told her as they finished the bathroom backsplash, a complex pattern of blue and green tiles that she'd selected and arranged herself. Maggie shrugged, but he caught the pleased smile she tried to hide. "It's just math, really. Patterns and angles." Rob watched his foster daughter, no, his daughter in every way that mattered, as she carefully wiped excess grout from the tiles. At 23, she was no longer the wary, defensive girl from the alley. College had given her confidence, straightened her posture, smoothed the rough edges of her speech. But underneath, he still glimpsed flashes of that fierce protectiveness, especially toward Tommy. The kitchen timer buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Dinner," called Lily from downstairs. At 24, his biological daughter had blossomed into a young woman, whose compassionate nature and keen insight made her perfect for her chosen profession. Social work. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that she now worked for the same system that had failed Maggie and Tommy. "I want to fix it from the inside," she'd explained when announcing her career choice, "so other kids don't fall through the cracks." Rob wiped his hands on a rag and followed Maggie downstairs, where the smell of lasagna filled the small kitchen. Tommy was already seated at the table, surrounded by textbooks and sketches. "Clear the table." "College boy," Rob said, ruffling his son's hair. Still a habit. Though Tommy now stood 2 inches taller than him at 20, Tommy groaned but began gathering his papers. "I've got this project due Monday. Residential design concepts. It'll wait until after dinner," Maggie said firmly, taking the papers from him and setting them carefully on the counter. As they settled around the table, a new one that Rob and Tommy had built together last summer, Rob looked at the 3 young adults who had once been children under his care. Pride swelled in his chest, tempered only slightly by the bittersweet knowledge that this chapter of their lives was coming to an end. Lily was already living in her own apartment closer to downtown, though she came home every Sunday for dinner without fail. Maggie, in her 2nd year of nursing school, split her time between their house and campus housing. And Tommy, studying architectural design at the community college, was talking about an internship in Seattle next semester. Their paths were diverging, just as they should be. Just as he'd raised them to do. "So," he said, passing the salad, "who's going to tell me about their week first?" Dinner conversation flowed easily, a comfortable rhythm built over years of shared meals. Lily talked about a difficult case at work. No names, of course, but the frustration was clear in her voice as she described a system still riddled with gaps despite her best efforts. Maggie shared stories from her clinical rotations at the hospital, her natural empathy making her a favorite among elderly patients. Tommy enthusiastically explained his latest design project, his hands moving animatedly as he described sustainable housing concepts. Rob mostly listened, offering the occasional comment or question. These Sunday dinners were his anchor, the reward for all those years of tight budgets and sleepless nights. Seeing his children thriving, pursuing paths that sparked passion in their eyes, it was everything he'd hoped for them. What he didn't mention was the persistent fatigue that had dogged him for months now, or the weight he'd lost without trying, or the occasional sharp pain in his side that he'd been ignoring, chalking it up to long hours at the construction site. They didn't need to worry about him. They had their own lives to focus on, their own futures to build. After dinner, as the kids, he still thought of them as kids, though they'd protest the term, cleared the table, Rob slipped outside to the small back porch. The autumn air held a chill that penetrated his thin shirt, but he welcomed it, hoping it might clear the fog of exhaustion that seemed to cloud his mind more and more these days. The door slid open behind him, and Tommy stepped out holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing one to Rob. "Thanks, bud." The nickname slipped out automatically, a relic from when Tommy was a 9-year-old with 2 big eyes and shoes held together with duct tape. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and looking out at the yard that still needed work. Another project for another weekend. "I got a letter from the Seattle firm," Tommy finally said. "They offered me the internship." Rob turned to him, smiling despite the pang in his heart. "That's fantastic. When do you start?" "January. It's 6 months, with a chance of permanent position after." Tommy hesitated. "It's a big opportunity." "The biggest," Rob agreed. "I'm so proud of you, Tom, really." Tommy nodded, staring into his coffee mug. "I wouldn't be here without you, you know. Not just college, I mean, anywhere, I'd probably be—" "Don't." Rob cut him off gently. "We don't play that game, remember? No point imagining what might have been." It was an old rule in their household, born from those early days when Maggie would spiral into anxiety about what could have happened if Rob hadn't found them that winter night. Tommy nodded again, then surprised Rob by pulling him into a one-armed hug. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." The simple words, spoken by the boy who had become a man under his roof, hit Rob harder than expected. His throat tightened, and he squeezed Tommy's shoulder in response, not trusting his voice. Inside, he could hear Lily and Maggie laughing about something, the sound drifting through the partially open door. Tommy released him and turned back toward the house. "Come on. Maggie made that apple crumble you like." Rob followed him inside, back to the warmth and light of their kitchen, trying to ignore the chill that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. The following months brought more changes. Tommy moved to Seattle in January, leaving his bedroom strangely empty despite his promise to come home monthly. Maggie's nursing program intensified, keeping her at the hospital for long shifts that often meant Rob ate dinner alone. Only Lily maintained their Sunday tradition faithfully, sometimes bringing her new boyfriend, Carlos, who worked with her at social services. Rob adjusted to the emptier house, telling himself this was the natural order of things. Parents raised children to leave, to build their own lives. That was the point of it all. Meanwhile, his own health continued to decline. The fatigue worsened until getting through a workday became a monumental effort. The pain in his side grew more persistent. Twice he nearly passed out on job sites. "You need to see a doctor," his foreman, Pete, told him after catching him leaning heavily against a wall, breath shallow and face pale. "Just need more sleep," Rob insisted. "Bullshit," Pete said bluntly. "You look like hell, Donovan. Whatever it is, it's not getting better on its own." But Rob kept putting it off. Medical bills were the last thing he needed with 2 kids still in school. And a small, superstitious part of him feared that naming whatever was wrong would make it real. It was Maggie who finally forced the issue. Coming home unexpectedly between shifts, she found Rob on the kitchen floor, where he'd slid down after a wave of dizziness overtook him. "Dad!" She was beside him instantly, nurse's training kicking in as she checked his pulse, his pupils, firing questions he couldn't quite focus on. "Just stood up too fast," he tried to explain, but Maggie's expression told him she wasn't buying it. "How long have you been feeling sick?" she demanded, helping him to a chair. "It's nothing." "Don't!" Her voice was sharp, reminiscent of the defensive girl she'd once been. "Don't lie to me."
"How long?"
Under her intense gaze, so like her mother's must have been, Rob finally admitted the truth. The months of fatigue, the pain, the weight loss he'd hidden under looser clothes. Maggie listened, her face growing paler with each detail. When he finished, she stood up decisively. "Get your coat. We're going to the hospital now." "Maggie, it's not an emergency." "It is to me." Her voice broke slightly, and in that moment, Rob saw the scared 13-year-old who'd lost one parent already. He couldn't put her through that fear again. So he went, allowing Maggie to drive him to the same hospital where she did her clinical rotations. She spoke rapidly to the intake nurse using medical terminology he didn't fully understand, and somehow bypassed the hours-long wait typical of emergency rooms. Tests followed. Blood draws, scans, doctors with serious expressions asking pointed questions about his family history. Throughout it all, Maggie stayed by his side, her nursing student status giving her access and understanding that Rob lacked. It was past midnight when a doctor finally came in with results. Rob recognized the expression immediately. It was the same carefully neutral look he'd seen on the oncologist's face years ago when Linda was... The doctor's office was too bright, too sterile, too filled with cheerful posters about health that seemed to mock Rob as he sat alone in the small examination room. He'd insisted on coming by himself today. The kids had school, work, lives that shouldn't revolve around his illness. Besides, he already knew what the doctor would say. The tests had confirmed it last week. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It had spread to his liver. 6 months, maybe less. Dr. Reynolds entered, her face professionally composed but her eyes kind as she sat across from Rob. In her hands was a folder thick with test results and treatment options. "How are you feeling today, Rob?" she asked, though they both knew it was just a formality. "Same as yesterday, tired, sore." He tried to smile. "Ready to hear my options, I guess." Dr. Reynolds nodded and opened the folder. "I want to be straightforward with you. The cancer is aggressive and it's spread further than we initially thought." Rob appreciated her honesty. No sugarcoating, no false hope. Just facts. Standard treatment would include chemotherapy to slow progression and manage symptoms. "Your insurance will cover most of that." She paused. "There are also more aggressive treatment protocols. Combination therapies, targeted treatments that might extend your timeline significantly. But they're experimental and unfortunately your insurance considers them elective." "Meaning expensive," Rob said. "Very." She named a figure that made Rob's stomach drop. More than he'd paid for his house. More than all 3 kids' educations combined. "So not an option," he said quietly. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. "There are also clinical trials. You might qualify for what would those cost? Many trials cover treatment costs, but there are still expenses. Travel to research centers, time away from work, additional medications not covered by the trial." Rob nodded, already doing calculations in his head. His savings were minimal. The house had some equity, but not much. His construction pension would barely cover the mortgage payments if something happened to him. And realistically, he said, even with the expensive treatments or trials, we're talking about extending my life by what? A year, maybe 2? Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Mr. Donovan, she said finally, I believe in being honest with my patients. This cancer is very difficult to treat effectively, especially at this stage, but I've also seen patients defy the odds. Sometimes having something to fight for makes all the difference. Rob thought of his children, Tommy with his architectural designs spread across the kitchen table, Maggie in her nursing scrubs coming home exhausted but fulfilled, Lily passionately working to fix the system that had almost failed her siblings. They were his something to fight for. But they were also why he couldn't bankrupt them with medical bills they'd be paying off long after he was gone. I'll take the standard treatment, he said. Whatever insurance covers. Dr. Reynolds nodded, her expression carefully neutral. We'll schedule your first chemotherapy session for next week. In the meantime, I'm prescribing medication for pain management and nausea. She handed him several prescriptions. And Rob, bring someone with you to chemo. Trust me on this. As Rob drove home, the prescriptions on the passenger seat beside him, Portland's familiar streets seemed somehow different. The coffee shop where he sometimes stopped before work. The park where he'd taught Tommy to ride a bike. The community center where Lily had performed in middle school plays. Had they always looked so vibrant? Had the cherry trees always bloomed so pink against the gray sky? Or was it just that he was seeing them now through the lens of limited time? At home, he sat in his truck for a long moment, gathering his strength. The kids would be home soon. All 3 had moved back temporarily, despite his protests. Tommy had taken a leave from his internship. Maggie had rearranged her clinical schedule. Lily worked remotely whenever possible, their lives on hold because of him. Inside, he found the house spotless, another sign of their worry. Normally, their home had a lived-in look. Newspapers on the coffee table, coffee mugs forgotten on bookshelves, shoes kicked off by the door. Now everything was in its place, as if they could control his illness by controlling their environment. Rob headed to his bedroom, intending to rest before they arrived, but stopped in the hallway, caught by the photos lining the walls. 20 years of memories captured in frames. Lily at her high school graduation, flanked by a beaming Maggie and Tommy. All 3 kids on the beach during their first family vacation. 3 years after the Chen siblings had come to live with them. Tommy proudly holding up the model house he'd built for a school project, with Rob's arm around his shoulders, and there, nearly hidden among the others, one of the few photos of Linda, Rob's wife, Lily's mother, taken before her illness. She smiled at the camera, unaware of how drastically their lives would change, how Rob would one day find himself raising not just their daughter, but 2 other children who needed him. I wish you could see them, Rob whispered to her image. You'd be so proud. The sound of a key in the lock broke his reverie. Quickly, he wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. No need to worry them more than necessary. Dad, you home? Tommy called. In here? Rob answered, moving toward the kitchen where he could hear them gathering. All 3 looked up when he entered. Lily unpacking groceries. Maggie arranging pill organizers. Tommy putting on water for tea. Their faces wore identical expressions of barely concealed concern. How'd it go? Maggie asked, trying to sound casual. Rob forced a smile. Fine. Starting chemo next week. Got some prescriptions to fill. He placed the papers on the counter, watching as Maggie immediately picked them up, her nursing training evident as she read through the medications. I'll take care of these, she said. Some of them need to be taken with food, so you should eat something. I'm not really hungry. Doesn't matter, she cut him off, nurse mode fully activated. Your body needs nutrients to fight this. Lily appeared at his elbow with a chair. Sit, I'm making soup. Guys, really, I can take care of myself. Dad, Tommy said quietly. Let us do this, okay? Please. Something in his son's voice, a plea, a need to be useful, made Rob relent. He sat at the kitchen table watching as his children moved around the kitchen in a choreographed routine they seemed to have worked out in his absence. Lily chopped vegetables with focused precision. Maggie organized his medications while explaining each one's purpose and side effects. Tommy made tea, then sat beside Rob and showed him sketches for a wheelchair ramp they wouldn't need yet but might eventually. They were planning for his decline, Rob realized with a pang. preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. That night, after they thought he was asleep, Rob overheard them talking in the living room, their voices low but intense. "There has to be something better than basic chemo," Maggie was saying. "I've been researching clinical trials that he'd have to qualify for, travel for, and still pay out-of-pocket expenses," Lily pointed out. "Dad's being practical." "Practical?" Tommy's voice rose slightly. "It's his life we're talking about." "Lower your voice," Maggie hissed. "I know it's his life. That's why I've been talking to doctors at the hospital. There's a specialist in Seattle, one of the best for pancreatic cancer. If we could get Dad in to see him, with what money?" Lily asked, always the pragmatist. "You know Dad won't touch his pension. He's saving it for us." "I don't want his money," Tommy said fiercely. "I want more time with him." The raw pain in his son's voice made Rob's chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with his cancer. They were all so young to be dealing with this. Tommy barely 20, Maggie 23, Lily only 24. They should be focused on building their own lives, not watching his end. The conversation in the living room continued, shifting to logistics. Who would take Dad to chemo appointments? How to adjust the bathroom for when he got weaker? Whether they should look into hospice care for later. Later, such a neutral word for when he would be dying. Rob turned away from the door, moving quietly back to his bedroom. On his nightstand was a photo of all four of them from last Christmas, laughing as they struggled to fit into a selfie. They looked happy, healthy, whole. 6 months ago, Rob had been focused on his kids' futures, on seeing them launch successfully into adulthood. Now his horizon had shrunk dramatically. Would he see summer? Would he be here for Lily's birthday in August? For Tommy's graduation next December? The questions circled endlessly as he drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next few weeks brought new routines. Chemo left Rob nauseated and exhausted, forcing him to take a leave of absence from work. The kids established a rotation so someone was always home with him, despite his insistence that he didn't need constant supervision. "We know you don't need a babysitter," Lily told him when he complained. "We're just spending time with you. Is that so terrible?" Put that way, he couldn't argue. And truthfully, he treasured these unexpected months with his children, even as he hated the reason for them. Tommy woo. But despite their care, Rob felt himself weak. The moment everything changed began like any other Wednesday. Rob sat on the living room couch, a blanket tucked around his thinning frame despite the mild spring weather. His body had become unreliable in regulating temperature, another indignity of the disease consuming him from within. On the coffee table lay his morning pills, neatly arranged by Maggie before she'd left for her clinical rotation, alongside a protein shake he couldn't stomach drinking. 4 months had passed since his diagnosis. According to the timeline Dr. Reynolds had given him, he was reaching the halfway point of his remaining life. But Rob knew better. The rapid weight loss, the increasing pain, the days where getting from bed to couch required every ounce of his strength. His body was failing faster than predicted. He'd stopped chemotherapy 2 weeks ago. The treatment had made him violently ill while doing little to slow the cancer's progression. Quality over quantity, Dr. Reynolds had said when he'd made the decision. More precious weeks to spend with his children, without the debilitating side effects. Tommy sat nearby, sketching building designs while pretending not to watch Rob's every move. They'd fallen into this routine. One child always home, always watchful, always pretending not to hover while doing exactly that. "You don't have to babysit me today," Rob said, wincing as he shifted position. "Don't you have that meeting with your academic advisor?" Tommy looked up from his sketch pad. "Rescheduled it. No big deal. Another sacrifice made without discussion." Rob knew Tommy needed to start making plans for returning to school, for picking up the pieces of his education after Rob was gone. But he didn't have the energy to argue today. The front door opened unexpectedly, bringing a rush of fresh air and the sound of quick, purposeful footsteps. "Maggie?" Tommy called, checking his watch with a frown. "Aren't you supposed to be at the hospital until 6? Maggie appeared in the living room doorway, still in her nursing scrubs, her face flushed and her eyes bright with an intensity Rob hadn't seen in weeks. "I left early," she said, dropping her bag and coming to kneel in front of Rob. She took his hands in hers, studying his face with the clinical assessment he'd grown accustomed to. But today there was something else in her expression, something almost like hope. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Rob nodded, concerned by her urgency. "What is it?" "The fatigue, the night sweats, the pain in your upper abdomen that wraps around to your back. They've gotten worse, haven't they? And you've been having trouble eating anything solid." Rob glanced at Tommy, who had set aside his sketchbook and was watching them intently. "Yes," he admitted. "It's progressing." Maggie squeezed his hands. "Why didn't you tell us? What good would it do? You all know where this is heading. The timeline's just accelerated a bit." "How bad is the pain, really?" she pressed. "Scale of 1 to 10, Rob sighed. "On good days, a 6. On bad days." He didn't finish. Maggie nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "I was assisting Dr. Chen today. He's one of the oncologists at Portland Memorial. We got talking about pancreatic cancer cases, and I mentioned you." Rob frowned. "Maggie, you know there's nothing more they can do." "Let me finish," she interrupted, that same strange energy vibrating through her. "Dr. Chen is connected to a clinical trial at Seattle Grace, a new combination therapy approach for advanced pancreatic cancer. The preliminary results have been promising, not for curing it, but for significantly extending life expectancy and quality of life." Tommy moved closer, hope flickering across his face. "How significantly?" "In some cases, years instead of months." The word hung in the air between them. Years. Not a cure, but time. Precious, unexpected time. "The trial is closing to new patients next week," Maggie continued quickly. "But Dr. Chen thinks with your medical history, you'd be a strong candidate. He's willing to make some calls, see if they can evaluate you." Rob's mind raced, calculating the logistics even as he tried to temper the dangerous spark of hope. "Seattle is a 3-hour drive. I'm not sure I could manage that regularly in my condition." "They have patient housing," Maggie said. "And I could take a leave from my program to go with you." "Absolutely not," Rob said firmly. "You're not putting your education on hold again." "Dad, no, Maggie." He squeezed her hands gently. "I appreciate you looking into this, I do. But even if I qualified for this trial, there are costs involved. Travel, accommodation, time away from work for all of you." "I've already looked into it," Maggie said, her determination unwavering. "The trial covers the treatment itself. Yes, there would be other expenses, but we can't afford them," Rob finished for her. "We're already behind on the mortgage. Tommy's tuition payment for next semester is coming due. Lily's helping with the bills, but she has her own rent to pay." The spark in Maggie's eyes dimmed slightly, but her grip on his hands tightened. "So we'll find a way to afford it." "There has to be a way." Before Rob could respond, the front door opened again and Lily's voice called out, "Hello? Why are all your cars here in the middle of the day?" Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, Carlos at her side, both looking confused at finding the impromptu family gathering. "What's going on?" Lily asked, immediately sensing the tension in the room. Tommy quickly explained about the clinical trial while Maggie disappeared into the kitchen, returning with her laptop. Rob watched his children with a mixture of love and resignation. Their determination was touching, but he'd made peace with his prognosis. Getting their hopes up now seemed cruel. "The application deadline is Friday," Maggie was saying, scrolling through information on her screen. "If we submit everything tomorrow and if Dr. Chen makes those calls, we might have a chance." "Even if I qualify," Rob interjected, "we need to be practical about the costs." "I've been saving," Tommy said suddenly. "The internship paid well and I barely spent anything in Seattle before I came home." "It's not a huge amount, but it's something." "That's your tuition money," Rob protested. "School can wait," Tommy said with a shrug. "You can't." Lily sat beside Rob on the couch, her social worker's practicality coming to the fore. "Let's make a list of all possible resources. Tommy's savings, my overtime pay, Maggie's fellowship stipend." "I won't let you drain your accounts for this," Rob said firmly. "It's not your decision," Maggie replied, equally firm. "We're adults now, Dad. We get to choose how to spend our money." "And we choose you," Tommy added quietly. Rob looked at his children, overwhelmed by their determination. These weren't the scared, vulnerable kids he'd raised. These were strong, capable adults who were making their own choices, even if those choices broke his heart. "What about crowdfunding?" Carlos suggested, speaking for the first time. I've seen families raise substantial amounts for medical treatments. Rob shook his head immediately. I'm not asking strangers for handouts. It's not handouts, Lily countered. It's community support. And you wouldn't be asking. We would. The discussion continued well into the evening, with Rob's objections gradually weakening in the face of his children's united front. By the time they ordered pizza that none of them really ate, a plan had formed. They would apply for the clinical trial first, to see if Rob even qualified. If he did, they would pool their resources and launch a community fundraising effort. As the kids cleared away the pizza boxes, Rob sat quietly, watching them work together with the easy coordination of people who truly knew each other. Tommy rinsing plates, Lily loading the dishwasher, Maggie wiping down counters, Carlos taking out the trash. A family, expanded and unconventional, but a family nonetheless. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Maggie called into her clinical rotation, explaining the situation to her supervisor. Tommy drove Rob to Portland Memorial for the additional tests Dr. Chen wanted, before making his recommendation to the trial committee. Lily worked remotely from the hospital waiting room, making calls during her breaks to research assistance programs for clinical trial participants. By Friday afternoon, exhausted but cautiously optimistic, Rob found himself back at Dr. Chen's office, his 3 children flanking him like honor guards. The good news, Dr. Chen said, reviewing the test results, is that you're a strong candidate for the trial. Despite the progression of your disease, your overall health is good, and you meet all their criteria. Rob felt Maggie squeeze his hand. I've spoken with the lead researcher, Dr. Patel. Dr. Chen continued. She's reviewed your case and is willing to accept you into the trial. But there's a catch. Treatment would need to begin next week, which means being in Seattle by Monday. That's only 3 days from now, Tommy said. Dr. Chen nodded. The trial has limited slots, and they need to begin the protocol with all participants within a specific time frame. We'll get him there, Lily said decisively. There's more you should know, Dr. Chen added, his expression serious. This treatment is intensive. There will be side effects, potentially severe ones. And while the preliminary results are promising, there are no guarantees. We're talking about the possibility of extending life, not curing the disease. We understand, Rob said quietly. Thank you for being direct. Dr. Chen handed them a thick folder of information. Review this carefully. If you decide to proceed, call my office by tomorrow afternoon. We'll need to coordinate with the Seattle team. Outside in the parking lot row, there was this TA,